the kangaroo rat somewhere. The kangaroo rat has really long loops of Henle. And why is that helpful?
For water reabsorption, since they don't drink water, they just get it from their food.
So then what happens to your urine?
It's highly concentrated.
Super highly concentrated, yeah. Because remember, they only get water from their food. They don't drink water even though they live in the desert. And so there's variation among animals with the length of the loop of Henle, and they're correlated with how concentrated the urine can be. So if you live in an environment where you don't want to concentrate the urine, you might not even have a loop of Henle at all. Other questions? If the urinary system is still confusing, are there other things I can help you with?
I think it was more just like didn't stick with me as much. It's not necessarily like super confusing.
So I think looking over this would be helpful to make sure. I mean, some of the. How about this? I'll give you some of the main points.
Okay.
So we'll go through this in like fast speed urinary
round.
system. So if you want to look at those animations, remember that they're posted on Canvas. And Lydia was having trouble. It was you, right, Lydia?
Yeah.
Having trouble opening. So I recorded them on Panopto, so they're kind of weird, but I think it echoes a little because I had my sound up as I was recording, which kind of messed up some of them. But you can watch these, and they have nice summaries of everything, which I think is good. So make sure that you review the structures, but I'm not going to go through those right now. The big picture stuff of what you need to understand is where blood flows. So you need to understand, this is something worth making sure that you know these in order, and you should understand like that blood is flowing here, and then it goes, and then it comes back out. But what does that actually mean? So make sure that you understand that on this diagram, you can see that it's pointing at the afferent arterioles going in. So where you have the cortical radiate arteries, that's where the afferent arterioles are located. So this is saying that all the glomeruli are in this part here, and then we have blood going out through the efferent arterioles into the peritubular capillaries. And you can see those sorts of things there, and then the blood will come back out this way. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
And so specifically, we care about this because as the blood flows through the glomerulus, we're going to be pushing things through. And remember, what are we going to be pushing through? What's going to go out in the filtrate?
Ions and glucose and water.
Yeah, ions and glucose and water. And what's not going to go into the filtrate?
Larger proteins.
Large proteins and what else?
Red blood cells.
Red blood cells. Okay, so those are some of the important things to remember. And then, so we have this lovely filtrate. And then we have this proximal convoluted tubule. And what is that? What's the important thing about the proximal convoluted tubule? What is the significance of the proximal convoluted tubule?
That's where like glucose gets pumped back into the blood, right?
Yeah, so it's where a lot of stuff gets pumped back. So it's the major site of reabsorption. So when you think, like, if you think about things, like, you should sort of have like an automatic association in your head. Like when you think about the glomerulus, what should be the word that you think?
Filtrate?
Filtration, yeah, exactly. You should think glomerulus, filtration. When you think proximal convoluted tubule, you should think
reabsorption.
Reabsorption. When you think loop of Henle, what should you think?
Like concentration?
Yeah, concentration. That would be a good thing to think about. And so when you think about the descending loop of Henle, what should you automatically think of?
High concentration.
I couldn't hear.
High concentration, right?
Yeah, becoming a higher concentration. Why?
Because water's leaving.
Yeah, you should remember water in particular. And in the ascending loop, what should you think about?
To lower concentration.
Is it becoming less concentrated because what's leaving? think specifically. Make sure you remember what specifically is going out.
Sodium and potassium, right?
Yes, sodium, potassium, chloride ions.
Mhm.
So those are the kinds of things that you should think about. We spent a lot of time, I think, talking about filtration. So do make sure that you understand the concept of the filtration membrane. So when we look at the filtration membrane, we have to remember that there's two main things that are involved. There's blood cells, right?
Mhm.
There's blood vessels, not blood cells. There's blood cells within the blood vessel. So within the blood vessel, there's cells that line the wall of those blood vessels. And what do we call those cells that line it? What are the cells that line your blood vessels?
The capillary endothelial cells.
Yeah, capillary endothelial cells. And then what do we have coating the outside of it?
Podocytes.
Yeah, podocytes. So we have those two things. So when we look at the filtration membrane, we have to remember that the blood cells are going through the blood vessels, and then they're squeezing between the capillary endothelium, across the basement membrane, and in between the podocyte cell processes. So they squeeze through these filtration slits. So that's one thing. And we said that water, electrolytes, glucose, fatty acids, amino acids, nitrogenous waste, and vitamins, all those things can pass.
Mhm.
Another important thing to remember is the whole EPO and renin thing. That is a tricky thing, right? So what does EPO do?
Creates more red blood cells.
And what does renin do?
It increases the reabsorption of like sodium and potassium.
But
right?
what should you think automatically when we think renin?
Oh, is it high blood pressure or low blood pressure?
Yeah. So we should think about blood pressure automatically, right? And we'll go through that in a second. So remember that one thing that you don't want to forget is that these juxtaglomerular cells are the ones that are secreting EPO and renin.
Mhm.
And where are they located?
In between the distal convolutal tubule and the arterioles.
Mm-hmm. And together with the macula densa, which are part of the distal convoluted tubules, we have this thing called the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Okay. So remember that the RAA pathway, this is when you think about renin, you should automatically think about the RAA pathway. And what's the point of the RAA pathway?
To raise blood pressure.
To raise blood pressure. What organs are involved in the RAA pathway?
Kidneys.
Kidneys. That's one. That's a good
Your
one.
Your lungs.
What else?
Lungs.
Your lungs.
Lungs. What else?
Liver?
Liver. That's a good one. What's another one?
Brain?
Yeah. You can. I'll take the brain. What else?
Adrenal cortex.
Adrenal cortex. Those are the ones that I was hoping for. Okay. So what's the first player in the pathway? What does the liver produce?
Antidiuretic. Oh.
Angiotensinogen. Remember, that's the pre-hormone that is floating around. So the liver produces all this stuff. So this is in the plasma, right? Because the liver's producing all these plasma proteins. And so what activates this whole thing is the release of renin from the kidney. When does the kidney release renin?
When the blood pressure decreases.
When your blood pressure is too low. How does it know that blood pressure is too low?
In the glomerulus, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, when there's decreased blood flow through the glomerulus. So what happens when renin is released?
It converts into angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1.
Yes. And then what else do we need?
Your lungs to secrete ACE.
ACE. Remember, so if you have high blood pressure, what kind of medication might you take? You could take an ACE inhibitor. So why would an ACE inhibitor be useful?
So it'd drop your blood pressure.
Right, it would drop your blood pressure. Okay, so this converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, and then we get the other things. We get the brain, so you get thirsty, you get vasoconstriction, and you get aldosterone being released. And what happens when you release aldosterone? Carmen seems like a professional at that one, right? No?
Oh, sorry, I was unmuted. The it increases the reabsorption of sodium, right?
Yeah, and secretion of potassium. So what happens to the ion concentrations in the blood then? They go which way?
Up.
Up. And then what happens? Whenever you move more solutes into the blood, what happens?
Or water.
You get more water in there as well, and then we have an increase in blood pressure. Okay. So other things to think about are blood. Make sure that you review blood pressure stuff. Make sure you understand how to calculate the filtration pressure, because remember that there's pressure within the blood vessels, but then there's pressure moving things in the opposite direction. We have two types of pressure moving things in the opposite direction. What are those two things?
Capsular pressure and blood colloid osmotic pressure.
And what do those mean if you had to translate them into English?
The capsular pressure is the pressure exerted from the lining around the glomerulus.
Mm-hmm.
And then the blood colloid osmotic pressure is the pressure of water going back in. I don't know.
Yeah. So the colloid part means that what do we have left over in the blood after everything filters?
Red blood cells and
blood cells and
proteins.
So if a bunch of water goes out, what would happen? What would be left if all the water left and all the vitamins and all that other stuff left? And I mean, not all of it obviously does, but if it all did, what would you be left with in your blood?
Proteins.
But what would be the consistency of all this?
Solid.
Well, yeah, it would be like sludge, right? You know what I mean? It would be like mud that would be left. And would that flow very well?
No.
But anyway, it doesn't become sludge because why? Where will water move?
Back into the blood.
Back in, right? Because if you move all the water through, some of the water has to go back because it will want to, be at the right pressure in the blood vessels.
So the blood colloid osmotic pressure is what's going back into the blood so that it balances out the proteins and stuff that's left?
Yeah. Okay. Exactly that. Water and fluid. Some of the fluid is going to be pushed back just because there's osmotic pressure.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
All that, it doesn't want to be sludgy. We want to have water in there as well. And so the water is going to be pulled back in through osmosis.
Okay.
That's all it means. Yeah. So that's another thing to know. And then we already talked about RAA. And then we talked about the filtration membrane. And then the only other big concept, I think, is just remembering what goes out where. And so I would look at... Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. I was pressing up instead of down. I would look at... There's a couple of figures that I think are helpful. This one I think is super helpful in trying to remember what's going on where. Mm-hmm. And then this one is also, I think this slide is nice because it has these things in words, to help you remember what's going on. So what I would say also is don't forget that you can look over your homework because you took beautiful notes on the book, right? And you have all that lovely stuff to help you as a guide through all of this as well. And that's all of it, I think. Other questions?
I don't think so.
All we're doing for time. So at 10:52. Are there other, like, nobody asked anything about, like, the immune? So we have immune system. We already talked a little about respiratory. We didn't talk about any digestion.